I'm very pleased, Commandant Conor King, to ask you to make your opening statement. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Committee and Secretariat, we are privileged to be afforded the opportunity to join you today to give the perspective of the officers of Óglaigh na hÉireann on current retention issues affecting our members and the Defence Forces. The Defence Forces have been in a state of slow decline for almost a decade, and it has reached a point where this decline is becoming irreversible. Numerous reviews and commissions have touched on the root cause of this decline without actually addressing it. The failure to adequately resource defence in order to retain highly qualified and experienced personnel to maintain capability. RACO represents 95% of all Defence Forces commissioned officers and had the honour of addressing this committee just over 2 years ago in May 2019. At that time, it was an accepted fact that the Defence Forces was in a manning level crisis. We were awaiting the report of the Public Service Pay Commission, which ultimately proved to be a major disappointment. The measures contained within the report fell well short of what was required, and many still have not been implemented 2 years on by military and civil senior management, who continue to refuse to engage meaningfully with the representative associations. This has seen a scarcely believable deepening of the crisis, with the organisation's strength having fallen still further to a current low of 8,580, with around 8,200 of those deployable. We ask ourselves, have we reached the bottom yet? Although we are dealing with an organisation in crisis, the Defence Forces still has many positive aspects. There are few careers today that can offer the sense of identity, camaraderie and individual and collective pride that a life in the Defence Forces can. There is much that we do well as an organisation, from overseas deployment to maritime security and emergency aeromedical service, to training and education, but we're undermined by lack of investment, resources and contingent capability. Our members are undervalued and overstretched and are leaving the Defence Forces for more stable opportunities in the public service or better paid positions in the private sector at an unsustainable rate. Our mission is to champion the well-being of our members, and our key message is that the resourcing, remuneration, motivation and retention of our personnel is critical to saving our Defence Forces and ensuring its viability into the future. It is our firm belief that without adequately trained, motivated and incentivised personnel, there can be no defence capability. The greatest challenge to the Defence Forces today is simply staffing its appointments, particularly at the middle-ranking officer and NCO level. It has been demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt that we cannot hope to recruit our way out of this retention crisis. The White Paper on Defence states that the most fundamental requirement and a critical factor for success is well-trained, motivated, experienced and capable personnel with a wide range of skills and experience in order to successfully deliver government requirements. However, the increased rate of voluntary departures and rapid induction over the past number of years means that 24% of all operational personnel across the Army, Naval Service and Air Corps have 5 years service or less. For officers, it is even more stark. Since the commissioning of the latest extraordinarily large cadet class, 35% of all commissioned officers have less than 5 years service. This has severe implications for governance and supervision and increases organisational risk. It is telling that of all the white paper projects reportedly closed thus far, 5 years into the process, none have had any tangible impact on the retention of personnel. The dysfunctional cycle of turnover identified by University of Limerick researchers in 2016 has led to an ever-decreasing pool of suitably qualified and experienced personnel. And in an organisation whose stock in trade is the profession of arms and the management and execution of lethal force, this is a grave risk. Between 2016 and 2020, the organisation inducted 3,116 personnel, while losing 3,679, which was 41% of the average strength for those 5 years. This rate of churn has also led to a crippling recruitment effort, delivered by our members, but no amount of water has been able to fill the leaky bucket that the organisation has sadly become. Our members are called on by the Minister to care for and mould the countless recruit and cadet inductees that are currently inflating strength figures, yet are refused specialised instructors allowance, which was taken from officers under Haddington Road and has yet to be reinstated. Non-commissioned officer instructors rightly continue to receive this payment. However, officers bear the ultimate responsibility. When we look at the cost of training an officer, The cost benefit of retention over recruitment is self-evident. The cost of training one officer cadet is estimated at over €100,000 per student. At what point of dysfunction will management favour retention over the continual failing demands of recruitment? We cannot go to market to recruit a captain or a sergeant. We have to replace them with cadets and recruits. The cost to train a specialist officer in engineering, ordnance, or communications is significantly higher. The high rate of turnover has created significant manning level gaps in both line operational and technical units. We aspire to be tech-enabled, but we cannot train and retain sufficient technicians to maintain our current equipment. The solution to the staffing crisis was to be the high-level implementation plan called Strengthening Our Defence Forces, which has unfortunately been allowed to fail by Defence senior management, accompanied by a lack of political will to resource it and an absence of meaningful oversight. Having 7 out of 15 projects still behind schedule 2 years into a 1-year plan would be unacceptable at any time. But the fact that this is occurring in a government plan, sponsored and monitored by the Department of Taoiseach, in the face of the well-documented DF recruitment and retention crisis, is unconscionable. This does not bode well for future expansion to meet unmet defence and security needs that the ongoing Commission on the Defence Forces will likely identify. Our military structures need significant adjustment. Critical to the majority of the significant human resource issues in the Defence Forces at this time is a lack of contingency built into the establishment. The employment control framework was imposed at a time of severe financial crisis and is no longer fit for purpose. The 2012 reorganisation cut what was seen as the fat of the organisation at the time, seeking a lean organisational structure. But in an organisation which has been structured on a lean basis, every appointment is therefore being deemed essential. Thus, the removal of any personnel to fill a non-establishment vacancy, such as overseas, training courses, and most recently the establishment of a joint task force to support the HSE, strips away an essential employee from their normal place of work. Consequential staffing gaps have direct impact on the welfare and morale of personnel, exacerbating the dysfunctional cycle of turnover. Trainees should not be part of the organisation's reported strength, as this provides a misleading perspective on the strength and health of the organisation. Indeed, the high level of inductees in training further diminishes capability, as those personnel who are required to instruct are also removed from day-to-day operations, and in many instances, there are not dedicated appointments for this training. The pay determination model that applies to the public sector is a catch-all model that fails to catch all of the public service, and the worst off in this model is the Defence Forces. Our members willingly forego the right to industrial action and submit themselves to abide by military law. They are subject to mandatory selection for overseas service, required to achieve strict annual medical and fitness standards, are subject to compulsory random drug testing, are liable to be posted away from family for extended periods of time, and bear an unlimited liability in their service to the state, ultimately willingly volunteering to place themselves in harm's way. Unfortunately, this loyalty and commitment to serve has attracted much praise, but little else from successive governments. The only way for the Defence Forces to become an employer of choice, as envisaged in this high-level plan, is to compensate for the restrictions of military service by breaking relativities with the other public sector bodies. RACO indeed welcomed the commitment in the programme for government to a standing independent pay review body, but fails to understand how such a body can recognise the unique nature of military service while remaining within national wage structures as envisaged in the terms of reference. Such a mechanism for pay determination must deal with the unique retention issues that the Defence Forces experiences in isolation, or it cannot and will not work. Our members noted with dismay the appalling treatment of the Defence Forces in the recent pay negotiations, despite pronouncements by relevant ministers, both verbally and in writing, that there will be parity of esteem and fair treatment. The removal of a supplementary pension provision means 79% of post-2013 Defence Forces officers are planning to leave the organisation well in advance of their mandatory retirement age, due to inadequate provisions. To put this in context, this cohort makes up 45% of our membership, and it is the ticking retention time bomb that will undo any other good work done by our members who have worked so tirelessly to facilitate the unprecedented induction training levels. Chairman, if this is not resolved, then all of the effort put into inducting and training the recent extraordinarily large cadet classes will have been for nothing, as we watch them walk out the door. It is the very opposite of value for money and threatens future organisational viability. It's a significant barrier to retention of our members, and it is reflected in the recent finding in our exit survey that 30% of retiring Defence Forces officers would not recommend a career in the organisation to their family or to their friends, and a further 34% would only do so with significant improvements in conditions. The Working Time Directive, health and safety provisions, set out limits on the number of continuous hours employees can work over certain periods. It is clear that in the current environment, the Defence Forces cannot meet the requirements of the directive and maintain its operational outputs. What is equally clear is that a failure to provide adequate rest and compensatory time off for military personnel is significantly impacting their home life and the ability, therefore, of many of them to maintain a career in the Defence Forces. For too long, our management has treated members' time as an infinite resource, without consideration of work-life balance, and the fact that our organisation has never even recorded working time in contravention of EU law has denied our members access to benefits such as overtime, which are available to other public sector employees. The current strength of the Defence Forces is well below its minimum establishment. What is not reflected, though, and what the implementation of the Working Time Directive will surely reveal, is just how inadequate that establishment actually is. RACO has attempted to seek engagement on the implementation of the directive with our management in a reasonable and collaborative manner through the conciliation and arbitration scheme for the Defence Forces for many years now, without success. This has now necessitated the commencement of legal proceedings to vindicate the rights of our members. Enhanced capability ensures the protection, health, safety and well-being of our personnel. It inspires pride in service and it improves retention. Critical enablers possessed by normal military forces, such as strategic airlift, are not only logistical and strategic assets, but they also enhance the well-being of our personnel by ensuring that our people can be deployed and recovered from overseas missions in a safe and timely manner. Government spending on defence, the lowest in the EU by any identifiable metric, is dangerously inadequate. What defence services do we not provide as citizens of the state that other EU armed forces provide? And does this capability gap pose any strategic risks to Ireland, our citizens, or our EU partners? We must never apologise for the maintenance and resourcing of the state's insurance policy. The Chief of Staff should be accountable for a significant operational share of the defence budget, with emphasis on operations, capital expenditure and infrastructure. Furthermore, we cannot continue to rely on pay savings to fund capability development. The Army is required to maintain a contingent capability in order to be able to discharge its primary role, which is to provide for the military defence of the state from armed aggression. There are very significant capability and capacity deficiencies within the brigades. The Defence Force's current level of deployment and overseas operations is significantly higher than that of comparable militaries. Our members are really proud of our record of overseas service. However, the retention crisis has resulted in a significant impact on the frequency with which our personnel are required to travel. According to military management, in 2020, almost 25% of the deployable Army strength deployed overseas at one point or another. The Naval Service must be equipped and able to respond to identified threats. However, it has 9 ships, but barely an establishment for 6, and is therefore set up to fail. A lack of resilience in human resources has plagued Naval Service operations in recent times, with patrols being cancelled due to the lack of suitably qualified and experienced personnel, and 2 of our state's national fleet being tied up for the long term. This has a huge effect on the ability to conduct maritime defence and security operations effectively and safely, and cannot be allowed to continue. The Air Corps has no primary radar or intercept capability. Coupled with these deficiencies, the state's capacity for air mobility remains inadequate, leaving the air domain open to exploitation by any hostile actor or element. By formulating a whole-of-state policy, assigning specialist aviation roles such as search and rescue to the Air Corps, there can be mutual benefits to be achieved for the state, the Defence Forces, the Air Corps, and most importantly, the personnel who deliver these services. Our infrastructure is in dire need of overhaul. The Defence Forces Training Centre, for example, the centre of excellence for all training in the organisation, is in a dilapidated state due to a lack of investment. The 19th century structures are in urgent need of repair and demolition in some cases. Our stock of accommodation is insufficient for our personnel needs throughout the country. If the defence organisation is really serious about dignity in the workplace and the health, safety and welfare of its people, then it has a lot of work to do. Much of it comes down to an apparent policy of managed decline. The failure to replace civilian tradespeople as they retire has also severely curtailed the maintenance and upkeep of our facilities. Our people deserve to feel proud about the conditions in which they live and work. In too many locations, this is simply not the case. The ongoing Commission on the Defence Forces, which RACO called for in our previous appearance before this esteemed committee, is currently examining what the state wants us to do and what resources are required to execute the mission. If we are to be serious about defence and security, then there is major surgery and enormous investment required in Defence Forces capabilities, structures and staffing. We have allowed this proud organisation to deteriorate to an alarming degree through a mixture of unsuitable policy, comparatively poor paying conditions of service and a failure to invest in our people and structures. RACO contends that the Commission must be bold and ambitious in its recommendations if it is to make any tangible impact on a problem that is becoming unfixable. We note that the terms of reference state that in arriving at its findings and recommendations for arrangements for the effective defence of the country, the Commission will have regard to the level of funding provided by government for defence. We earnestly hope that this funding will be adequate to meet the demands generated by the experts' recommendations, and more fundamentally, that these recommendations will not be constrained by the resources which are allocated. Planning without resources is simply dreaming. We have a poor record of policy implementation in the defence sector, from the White Paper on Defence to the High-Level Implementation Plan. The Commission's recommendations must be fully resourced and accompanied by a strong implementation oversight body to ensure that its good work is not allowed to wither on the vine. If that occurs, then there could be a bright future ahead for Obi Maharan. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would like to acknowledge the phenomenal efforts of all of our members, supported by their families, who continue to put their shoulders to the wheel for the state during the pandemic response, and in their normal day-to-day roles, on land, afloat, in the air and overseas. From testing, tracing, vaccination and logistical support to the HSE, they have all truly done the nation proud during the fight against COVID-19 and are owed a debt of gratitude and not just flattery. The versatile and steadfast insurance policy that the Defence Forces provides to the state has been highlighted time and time again. We cannot allow the likes of COVID-19 and the inevitable shock to the public finances to be a reason not to invest in defence. On the contrary, it is specifically for black swan events, such as a global pandemic, that we need the robust national insurance policy that the Defence Forces provides. We must acknowledge and reward our people's efforts in facilitating the organisation's essential contribution to national resilience, notwithstanding the inadequate defence budget, and argue that the insurance policy, which the state demands from the Defence Forces, can only be comprehensive if it is properly funded and resourced. I would like to sincerely thank the Chairman and committee members for their time, and we're very happy to take any questions from the committee members.
Thank you very much, Cameron Conor King. Indeed, that was a comprehensive and lengthy and all-embracing submission for which we are very grateful. I now turn to members of the committee to ask questions and perhaps further elaboration on the points raised. I'm commencing with Deputy Brady. I'll then proceed to Senator Crockwell, Senator Joe O'Reilly, and Deputy Cathal Berry, who was experiencing some technical difficulties and who I hope is with us. So Deputy Brady, thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to our colleagues for joining us this afternoon for what has to be said is a pretty damning opening statement of the current situation with regards to the Defence Forces, and any report that I see that uses language such as, decline becoming irreversible, where there's a refusal to engage meaningfully, appalling treatment in relation to pay talks, breaches of EU law in relation to the working time directive, and that our Navy are set up to fail. If that isn't enough to set off alarm bells in any corridor, I don't know what is. So I just want to go through the statement, and there's a few things I just want to hone in on, Chair. And, the first point there is, in the opening paragraph or the second paragraph where it states that we've reached a point where or we're fast reaching the point where the decline is becoming irreversible. And maybe just to elaborate on that point, because I know we have all of the figures here, we have all of the stats, we know our defence forces are at about 8,500, and you state that only about 8,200 of those are deployable. So we know we're 1,000 plus below what we're supposed to be. Maybe you could just hone in on that point. What is the difference between deployable? You know, there's a figure of 300 there, so maybe you might just address that point. You go on to say, have we reached the bottom yet? You know, and I think that is a very, very serious question that the powers that be must answer. You also speak about, and you use the language there where there's a continued refusal to engage meaningfully with the representative bodies. And there's a further comment there where, in relation to the recent pay negotiations, you state that, you know, our members noted with dismay the appalling treatment of the Defence Forces in the recent pay negotiations, despite pronouncements by relevant ministers, both verbally and in writing, that there would be parity of esteem and fair treatment. And maybe you might just elaborate on that. Why, to me, it's very apparent why you feel that way, but maybe you might just elaborate on that a little bit when you say there was pronouncement by relevant ministers, both verbally and in writing. Just elaborate on that, you know, what commitments were given specifically. And I think, you know, while you also talk about the number of plans, you talk about the high-level implementation plan, which, you know, and you state which has been unfortunately allowed to fail by the Defence senior management through a lack of institutional and political will to resource it. You go on to say, having 7 of the 15 projects still behind schedule 2 years into a 1-year plan would be unacceptable at any time. But the fact that this is occurring in a government plan sponsored and monitored by the Department of Taoiseach. So can I just ask in relation to the implementation plan, the 7 of the 15 projects, could you maybe just elaborate on the projects that are behind schedule, how important they are in terms of the overall situation within the Defence Forces, the fact that we are still heading towards rock bottom, and, you know, quickly becoming, the decline quickly becoming irreversible. So how important that implementation plan is to all of that. And just to go back to the point there around the pay negotiations and the fact that you know, you felt there was appalling treatment. And just to get your views in regards to the failure of that, you know, the negotiations and the calls for members of the Defence Forces and representative organisations to be able to affiliate with it too, maybe just to get a view on that. Just turning now to the working time directive, and something that is causing huge concern, not just within the Defence Forces, but right across the board. I'm dealing with retained firefighters who are also in a similar situation, and, you know, also engaged in legal action in terms of the failure to implement the working time directive. Can I just ask, what recent engagement have you had in relation to the implementation of the working time directive? I know back in 2019 there was you know, accelerated provisions implemented at that stage. Where are they at? You know, and Just in relation to, you say there, it's necessitated the commencement of legal proceedings to vindicate the rights of our members. Maybe just give a brief update on where those legal proceedings are at this point. I just want to turn now to the Naval Service and, the comment there that, you make in your opening statement, the Naval Service. Sorry, Chair.
Deputy Brady. Sorry, just to be conscious of the time, you're now on, on your 7 minutes.
Two more points to
Maybe
make there,
if
Chair.
I give you another 90 seconds, 2 minutes, I'm very anxious to bring in other members, and I hope that if we can deal with the questions pretty smartly and in a concise manner, I will have time for a second round. But if you could, proceed accordingly. Thanks, Deputy.
Very brief here. Two final comments I just want to make. One in relation to the Naval Service, and the fact that you say that the 9 ships, but barely an establishment for 6, and therefore is set up to fail. Elaborate on those comments. Maybe some commentary on the recent recruitment attempts. I know the Minister joined one of your ships there recently as part of a recruitment, and how you feel those recruitment attempts might go without addressing the more substantive issues within the Navy and the broader the Defence Forces. And the last question and the last point, Chair, at this point relates to the management of facilities, and you make a point there, the failure to replace civilian tradespeople as they retire has severely curtailed the maintenance and upkeep of our facilities. Maybe you might give a broader picture in relation to that. What kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of tradespeople that have retired without being replaced, and the impact that is having within the Defence Forces and our barracks, etc., across the state? And I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thanks.
Deputy Brady, thanks, and thank you for your cooperation. Senator Crockwell, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to welcome the Defence Forces. Reco, I have to say at the outset, as a former serving member myself, I have to say the presentations that we've received from both yourselves and from PD4 in recent times are utterly depressing. I cannot understand how we have allowed such a proud organisation to be so utterly devastated in recent years. One of my great concerns is the massive intake of young officers into the cadets. Are we creating a problem going down the road when they all reach that glass ceiling that where only a very small few of those will actually have a military career? Colonel King, you mentioned adjudications and your success with adjudications. I argued some time ago against the appointment of a HR person in the Department of Defence, and sadly it wasn't listened to. What is it about the relationship you have with the department that you find yourself going into adjudications? Why is that happening? Why haven't you got some sort of a system whereby you can agree things without having to go to a third party to adjudicate on your behalf? I find it utterly baffling that we've put somebody in on a very high salary that should be able to resolve these issues, and that's not happening. You recently published an exit survey. I have to say, I found it rather strange that there was a need to do that, and clearly something stimulated you to carry out that survey. The outcome of the survey itself is actually horrifying. I, as you know, was a non-commissioned officer. When I was in the Defence Forces, officers joined for careers, and there was a huge loyalty from the state to its serving personnel, officers and NCOs, and there was massive loyalty from serving soldiers back. The outcome, where 30% of retired officers say they would not recommend the Defence Forces. And if we're being honest about it, 64% of them are saying they wouldn't recommend a career in the Defence Forces, albeit 34% of them, if we can find improvements, would be willing to do that, would be willing to recommend it as a career. What has gone so terribly wrong, in your view, that young officers are leaving and have such a dim view? Yet any time I meet retired groups, the pride of service has never left them. The camaraderie that existed, the sadness that one reads in your survey of people who loved every day they served and simply left because they could not have a normal family life. We hear stories of people having to commute all over the country for what appears to be no real benefit to the organisation, and I'd be interested in your views on that. The pay talks, I know my colleague Deputy Brady has mentioned on the pay talks, there was palpable anger from the Defence Force personnel that I would know that essentially there were no negotiations with RACO or with PD4. You were literally handed a fait accompli. You had no input whatsoever. How do you see a pay commission changing that? Or if a pay commission is stuck within the national percentages, whatever they will be agreed with ICTRU, what function do you see a pay commission having for the Defence Forces? Specialised instructors. I was part of the trade union movement and a president of the trade union movement when FEMPI came in, and a lot of allowances were removed during that process. But we have been unwinding those FEMPI cuts over the years. Are you telling me that your commissioned officers who are involved in specialist roles are still being impacted by FEMPI insofar as they don't have their specialised instructors allowance back? Because if they don't, that is a pretty serious matter. How have they been left out when everybody else is getting theirs back? I don't understand that. The other one is the issue of fixed promotions, particularly for specialised personnel such as medical officers. Is there a problem there? There was a problem some time ago. I'm not sure if that problem still exists. And if it is, can you just give us some idea about it? Just a couple of last points. The issues of overseas service. Ireland rightly talks with pride about our service in the United Nations, etc. It's my experience that if, say, a commandant from a barracks is sent overseas, that vacancy remains open while the commandant is overseas and some other young officer has to step in and take their place. How many officers, in your view, are operating at what I would call a grade above their pay grade, where they're taking responsibility, say a captain taking the responsibility of a commandant running a company or something, or a commandant taking the responsibility of a battalion? I'm somewhat concerned about that, if you have something on that. The issue of abatement probably doesn't impact your members as much as it does other ranks, but does RACO have a view on the issue of abatement and where it stands? Finally, this is more a statement than a question. The pop-up recruitment at the weekend, to my mind, brought recruitment to a new low. That we would find ourselves with a tent beside a ship hoping somebody would wander in off the street to join up. Is that how bad things have gone? So, leaving it at that, I'm delighted to see that you mentioned the Air Corps and search and rescue. I would hope to see the Air Corps used in a more productive way. Rather than the last port of call, they should be the first port of call for any air transfers. I leave it at that, Chair. I can see you want me to move on.
Thank you, Senator Corcoran.
Thank you.
As I said to Deputy Brady, I may well be in a position to have a second round, and if so, I'd be happy to revert to you. I'm conscious, Cameron King, that there are a large number of questions there over a wide range of issues. I'm also conscious that there are a number of members still anxious to get in. What I'll do is I'll take a contribution from Senator Joe O'Reilly, then I'll go back to Cameron King, and then I'll revert back to Deputy Berry and Deputy Clark. Is that okay? Senator O'Reilly, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our guests from RACO. Like colleagues, it's very disturbing if we have a crisis. I share the view that it's disturbing if we have a crisis of retention in the army. It's a great difficulty. Our Irish Army is one of the great institutions of our state, to which we all feel loyal to and proud of, and which has measured up to domestic crises as they've arisen over the years, and also which has done us proud in international service and peacekeeping. But it's not enough that we acknowledge that. We have to deal with the practical difficulties that exist. I had understood, but I presume it's at officer level that we're discussing today, but I had understood that a number of allowances had been restored a few years ago, and that I had thought the October pay agreement had made some progress in 2020, but I take your point, around pay, and I hope that the Commission deals with it. You might elaborate a bit more on the pay issue. Where are you specifically talking at officer level here, or is there a crisis right through? And you might elaborate there. But I certainly think it's disturbing if you're out of kilter with other restorations of pay, and we need to be very much aware of that, and certainly it's something that the Commission on the Defence Forces would need to address. I'm very interested in the question of where your officers are going, to where, when you're not succeeding in retention, when people are leaving, where do they go? And I know you did an exit survey, and it's disturbing that 30% would not recommend a career in the Army. But you might elaborate more on where are people going, and if it's an economic pull, if it's other career options, etc. Is it all about pay? Is it lifestyle? Could you please develop that for us a bit, as to what are the factors at play there in the pull away from you? If that would be so, the kind of Celtic tiger pull from you that would have existed in the past in a post-COVID world, it might take some time to develop again. But having said that, we do need to analyse very carefully, as the Commission does, why people are leaving prematurely and why they're not proud or not recommending the service. I think it's very disturbing that the working time directive has not been implemented. One would assume that that's a reform that could readily be achieved, and that there's no national economic imperative that could be argued there. That would seem to be very blatantly discriminatory, and would seem to be a very internal issue, really. You might elaborate on that, at where the fault lines are there and what could be done there. The question of time off, surely time off cannot be, should not be different for Army personnel than other public servants, and you shouldn't have a difficulty there. An effort should be made to accommodate you in terms of proper time off. It's disturbing that you talk in a modern age about having problems with accommodation, that the quality of accommodation. You might elaborate a little more on that, but that's quite a disturbing one. And what's your actual statement that the Naval Service is set up to fail, that is a very real issue. I was disturbed again on the fact that, are you telling us that there are no replacements now of civilian tradespeople who are there, who leave? Or is there a percentage replacement, or what is the issue there? We do need to restore the morale of our Army. We do need to have an Army where there's a level of contentment and pride and happiness among the membership. And that makes today's meeting very important, and the output from it. So I'd be interested if you respond again or elaborate on those. And all I can say is I'm a strong supporter of our Army. We have had a lot of Army personnel living in my county of Cavan, in both Cootehill and Cavan Town, and indeed other areas, and they've been great members of the communities they live in, and they've been a very positive force in those communities, in the social and cultural life of those communities, and in every facet of society. But the real issue here is internal today and internal conditions. So I look forward to your responses. Thank you, and thanks, Chair.
O'Reilly. I'm now going back to Cameron King to deal with the many questions that have been put by deputies and senators so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to all the committee members for their insightful questions. I'll start maybe chronologically with Deputy Brady, if that's okay, Chair. And I'll try and keep the questions brief just to facilitate the rest of the members. So the first question was to elaborate on the statement that the decline is becoming irreversible. Well, we have done a lot of modelling and submitted to the Commission on the Defence Forces Deputy, and we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that at the current rate of turnover, and with taking in even 700 recruits and cadets every year, which is not really sustainable and we haven't been able to do, we are never getting back to 9,500, ever. We need to get the turnover rate down below 5% and still bring in 600 people. And I believe our modelling says we'll get there at about 2026, if that happens. But a lot of work has to go in to make sure that we have the conditions to achieve that. You asked a question in relation to deployable versus what does deployable mean? Deployable for any modern armed force means people who are not in training, people who are not in full-time induction training, recruits, cadets, apprentices. They, in our opinion, and in the opinion of many other armed forces, in fact, the vast majority around the world, they're not deployable, they're not fully trained, they're not safe to be deployed with a weapon, which is our stock in trade. You asked about the refusal to engage meaningfully and statements by ministers and parity of esteem in relation to, I believe, to the pay negotiations. I think it's well known among the committee about the difficulties we and other associations experience at pay negotiations. And when we have, the hope going into a negotiation that we're going to be treated equally, just equally, not in any special way, just equally, and we don't get that, then it's very disconcerting for members. We had our minister, and we were happy to hear him speak during the Oireachtas that the Defence Forces would have a strong hand at the negotiation table. And we received in writing assurances from the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform that that would also occur. Sadly, his officials that night concluded an agreement, and we had been locked out of pay talks for 7 days at that point. I can't be any clearer than that. We talk about 7 out of 15 projects in the high-level implementation plan. And this is a real kicker for us. This is the one that really demoralises our members, because when we put so much work into the Public Service Pay Commission, we had one Public Service Pay Commission where we submitted to, and we got a second bite of the cherry specifically for the defence sector. And arising out of that were some measures, but were not enough to actually stop the high rate of turnover. But what we did get, and I know I may be a bit theatrical here, but we got a plan. There is a plan here, the high-level implementation plan. It is clear, and it says exactly what it's supposed to do. It gives specific timelines for specific projects. And there was an organisation set up within the Defence Organisation called the Programme Management Office to actually house this plan and to feed into it. And that was actually disbanded. So, that really shows the genuine approach that has been put into play here. And, we have a lot, like the Oireachtas has been told that the high-level implementation plan projects are being progressed, but we're not being let into any of them. And one thing that really I have to put a stop to as the General Secretary of RACO is the idea that projects are being discussed in the context of future pay negotiations. Because the Dáil has been told this, and it's not happening. The pay talks are done. The high-level plan was not discussed. Game over. You asked about the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and let me say at the outset that RACO has the height of respect for it too. The height of respect. We respect what they do for their members. They're extremely effective in how they represent their members. But you recognise that we spoke about the restrictions and the constraints that are placed on military personnel. For example, we cannot take industrial action. We spoke about the unique nature of military service and how some constraints are placed on our members that are not placed on other public servants. And we, like mandatory retirement ages, you know, unlimited liability, etc., etc. And if we are consistently being told that we are unique, then we have a right, we feel, to argue that there should be unique provisions to compensate for these restrictions and constraints. And nobody has been able to explain to us how going into an umbrella body like the Irish Congress of Trade Unions will actually make unique provision for our distinct requirements. Therefore, what we were calling for was an independent pay review body, not exactly like other jurisdictions, but one that was completely bespoke to the Irish Defence Forces. And what we wanted from that was a standing body which would be solely independent from the likes of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, which would have the latitude and which would have the autonomy to make interventions and to consistently go around to barracks, talk to all ranks, talk to families, look at accommodation, look at allowances. If there's a problem with ordnance or bomb disposal, look at maybe a retention bonus for that. If there's an issue with, for example, accommodation, try and come up with innovative solutions for that. But the thing is, sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought there. But the thing about the pay review body is that if it is going to be housed within national pay negotiations, then we fail to see, and our members fail to see, how it can actually make a difference. And that is a problem. We are in a bit of a bind here. You talk about the Working Time Directive and what recent engagement there has been, and you rightly reference accelerated provisions. There were accelerated provisions on two fronts in relation to resting off after a specific weekend duty. And we ended the practice of people who were up 24 hours or 24 hours on duty going back to their work or place of work the following morning at 8:30 in the morning, which was, rife throughout the organisation. And that was welcome. But recent engagement, you will be told on many occasions by our management that there is ongoing engagement. The last meeting we had on the Working Time Directive, despite asking every 2 months at Council, was the 24th of July 2019. That's nearly 2 years. That's why we regrettably have had to resort to external avenues to vindicate the rights of our members, because this, let's not forget, is a health and safety issue, and the failure to implement the Working Time Directive is what is directly leading to the burnout that is reflected in the exit survey, and was also reflected, remember, in the UL climate survey and focus group reports in 2015, 16 and 17. You asked about the Naval Service. 9 ships but an establishment for 6. Why do we say that? Well, the last reorganisation cut the establishment of the Naval Service even further by 50 personnel, which is fundamentally a ship's crew. But it actually increased the Naval Service from 7 ships to 9. So it's a simple equation. If you add hardware and remove the ability to operate that hardware, you're set up to fail, in our opinion. And this is before we actually talk about implementing the Working Time Directive, where, as we know, our members and PD4's members spend many, many long hours at sea in contravention of the Working Time Directive limits. And you asked about the recruitment drive. We will be the first to champion any innovation in relation to recruitment. And we've tried and even made submissions to a review of Defence Forces recruitment through the high-level implementation plan, but received absolutely no feedback. All we got was a thanks for your submission. And what we would say simply about recruitment is it has to be underpinned by the correct conditions in terms of pay, work-life balance and service. And if and when that occurs, then we will be the first to promote recruitment in the Defence Forces and induction. And we have not stopped doing that. And the ironic thing is we have a roadmap. We have a roadmap agreed by our members. I'd like to maybe bring in our president, Luke Foley, just to talk about the feeling on the ground when we signed up to this in 2019 versus the feeling on the ground now in relation to the lack of delivery.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee on behalf of the members. It's very appreciative for this opportunity to discuss our concerns I know my predecessor spoke of the frustrations in the forum in 2019. I think it's clear to see that we're beyond frustrations now in a much more, I suppose, crucial time to deal with these issues. I'm going to just discuss briefly, thank you, Conor, in relation to the issue for our members in relation to the YOs, so our younger post-2013 membership. Senator Crockwell, you pointed out the massive intake in YOs and whether they're going to reach the glass ceiling and find that there's no careers for them. Unfortunately, I think based on the data we have from our exit survey, in that 79% of our post-2013s don't see a career in the Defence Forces. And me, in speaking to the members on the ground, which I have done continually, this is echoed to me from all our post-2013 members. We had a recent commissioning of a class where 28 of those officers went to 2 Brigade, where I am. I did a seminar for them for a week, and they were already discussing their exit strategy from the organisation. Because, to put it simply, there's no long-term plan or place for them in the organisation, because they won't be able to avail of a pension or retirement age due to the lack of a supplementary pension. And a lot of these people are talking about moving to the other parts of the public sector for similar job roles. So they're not looking to go out to the private sector for big money. They're looking to stay in the public sector, but all they're looking for is job security and security in retirement, which I think is a fundamental right for all people who serve their state. So when the Senator talks about the glass ceiling, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get there, Senator. I think it's going to be a situation where people are going to leave over the next number of years. Trained personnel are going to leave that we can't replace with trained personnel from other areas of the public sector or from outside because of the unique nature of what we do. So it's very worrying, but I don't see it as being a glass ceiling for our post-2013s. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Luke. Deputy Brady, I think I've dealt with your questions, and I'd be happy to take any further questions afterwards. I might just move on to Senator Crockwell, if that's okay, and push on then. In relation to adjudications, you spoke about why do we go to adjudication. We always try to conciliate first and then arbitrate second. That's what the conciliation and arbitration scheme is. And in this regard, sometimes I have sympathy for the department because they always have to refer to DPER, to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, for everything. But having said that, we would feel that the only success that we have managed to have at the CNA scheme has been through the kind of zero-sum game that is the arbitration route. And, I have to say it was absolutely disenchanting that we didn't even have a third-party adjudication mechanism for over half of 2020 because they just weren't replaced. And that was soul-destroying, really, for our currency as a CNA scheme. Also, we've run into some problems recently in relation to adjudications that were initially not honoured, but thankfully we got over the line. I speak specifically about the cadets and the military service allowance, but that was resolved, thankfully, and I'd like to thank the Department of Defence for that. You spoke about the exit survey and why did we conduct an exit survey? Well, our members asked us to at a conference a number of years ago because the information wasn't coming out about why officers were leaving the Defence Forces. And we asked management for access to information, but it just didn't come for various reasons, perhaps due to resourcing or turnover, etc. So we conducted our own study, and you're absolutely correct when you say that the findings are quite troubling. And these are loyal, proud people. Like the average length of service of these 103 respondents was 19 years. So it's not as if they didn't like the organisation. But the sense of burnout and frustration and sadness, I would say, is palpable in those pages. And we don't like to come up here and say that 30% of our members wouldn't recommend to their family members a career in the Defence Forces. But it is specifically for reasons like the removal of the supplementary pension provision and not doing anything with the mandatory retirement age, that members have a duty almost to inform people, much as we do, when we go into cadets, the hardest thing in the world for us to do is to tell a cadet, by the way, you actually have to retire in your mid to late 50s and you won't be able to survive on the income. So you have a decision to make. You asked about specialised instructors allowance, and what I might do is just to, I might hand you over to the Deputy General Secretary, Lieutenant Colonel Derek Creasy, to discuss that, the SIA.
Yeah, specialised instructor allowance was brought in at a time when the organisation had done a bit of reflection in relation to incentivising and encouraging, the best and the brightest NCOs and officers to run the training for new inductees. It was a child of a thing, what we call the IMG, the Implementation Monitoring Group, which reviewed kind of the culture, I suppose, of the Defence Forces, and it identified a need to improve training, to standardise training, to set standards, and to, as I say, incentivise the best and brightest to come in and train. So there was an allowance paid based on additional qualifications that young officers or young NCOs had, and it also reflected the amount of hours. These are residential courses. The amount of hours that instructors had to do for, an 18-month cadetship or for a 6-month recruit training period. The allowance was identified as part of a review of allowances in the Defence Forces back in the days when FEMPI was a kind of a growing concern. And it was effectively removed. It was identified as being no longer required and was removed for officers only. At the time, we had in the region of 40 to 50 personnel, officers in receipt of it across the Defence Forces. But as a saving measure, it was brought in as part of the cuts to be brought in, and it was only removed for officers. And the officers who were in receipt of it at the time had the allowance bought out. It's important to point out that the allowance remains for NCOs and continue to be paid throughout all the cuts that were there. PD4 had agreed to a different way of implementing savings, and the method that they had gone with that has achieved the savings required, and some of the allowances that they had decided in terms of new entrant pay have now been reversed. For us, we've identified as an allowance that is paid to certainly a cohort of the hardest working individuals in the Defence Forces, and we have sought it back under the reversal of the various cuts that are there to no avail. So as I said, it's an allowance paid to all three services, the Naval Service, the Air Corps and the Army, to the hardest group. And we feel as part of the unwinding of FEMPI and part of the restoration of pay and allowances that's going across the public sector, as identified earlier on, this is an allowance that we have identified that we spoke about morale there earlier on, that would be a huge morale booster, a real force multiplier, very much an indication that we appreciate the people that are working the hardest in the Defence Forces, and hence we would like to see specialised instructors allowance for officers, which was not bought out, I have to stress. It was bought out for a specific group of members who at that time were there to save, was there brought in to save money, and that need or that imperative has now gone. So that's really as much I'd say about that.
I might bring Luke in. Luke is actually the commander of the Brigade Training Centre and actually witnesses the work that these officers do on a daily basis.
Thank you, Conor. Traditionally, the unit that I'm in would have attracted instructor allowance for the officers, and when I was in the unit as a lieutenant, I would have received the allowance for the extremely long hours that I put in and the qualifications that I brought to the appointment. So as the unit commander, I see my members now doing running courses, the most common course we run in the BTC, which is my unit. There's other training establishments that my members are in, but in my one, we run a 6-month potential NCO course to train up corporals. And then the hours that my staff, I did a survey on this after the last course which we completed. The hours that they're doing is on average between 56 and 60 hours a week when you take the 6-month period into account. So for that time, they're training. They also have the oversight and they take on the risk in relation to that course, and they're training with my NCOs, but they're not receiving a similar payment that my NCOs receive in recognition of the hard work that they put in. So it is a fundamental issue for our members who are affected by this. So thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I take Senator Crockwell's question on fixed period promotion, and you specifically mentioned medical officers. It's important to take a few seconds just to understand the importance of medical officers in the Defence Forces, you know, and the application of force or travelling overseas, training, the use of, you know, lethal force. Having MOs is not just about medical care. It's, you know, it's about trust. It's about asking people to put themselves in danger and that people are looked after. I think the establishment for medical officers in the Defence Forces is around 24, 25. That might sound a lot for an organisation that's meant to have 9,500. But when you consider we currently have 3 officers, medical officers deployed at any one time, so effectively you have 3 forming up, 3 overseas and 3 just coming back. You need a kind of a panel of, you know, 9 just for overseas commitments, and that's before you do annual medicals or any kind of medical treatment that might go on within the Defence Forces. I think we're all aware of the situation, you know, internationally and nationally, of the shortage of doctors. So way back in 2012, it was decided in agreement with the association. We actually have a Conciliation Council report which said we would give a boost to newly recruited doctors after 3 years. We would promote them from captain to commandant after 3 years, what we call fixed period promotion. Now you might say that's a great benefit, and it doesn't exist anywhere else in the public sector. But the reality was, all we were doing was reflecting pay scales that were available in the HSC or you know, in the wider private sector for doctors. 2012, it was the number 1 item on the risk register at the time was the availability and recruitment and retention of medical officers in the Defence Forces. So to bring in this provision where we promote doctors after 3 years to commandant was a really, really good piece of work. We know just briefly in 2015, fixed period promotion for all special service officers in the Defence Forces was removed, only for it to come back, thankfully, in 2019 when Minister Keogh, I think, looked at the wider problem and said, yes, in relation to special service officers, we will continue to invoke fixed period promotion. Last February, we had a doctor who was recruited in 18 who thought he had a fixed period promotion after 3 years to commandant, be told and denied his promotion. It was not going to happen. This was news to us because, as I say, we had a Conciliation Council report in agreement with the department that it should happen after 3 years. And really, this has now, as this officer is the vanguard of people, the 4 or 5 officers who were recruited after him, they're all now reconsidering their service in the Defence Forces. And as I say, if we have an establishment of 22, we probably have about 15 on our books. To lose 4 or 5 officers of medical officers at this stage would be an absolute disaster. And I can't understand an attitude which would sort of deny fixed period promotion when you know the logic of this was all set out back in 2012 and agreed with the association. So the impact of this, as I say at the start, medical officers, without medical officers in the Defence Forces, we can't deploy overseas, we can't train, we can't fire any of the larger weapons, we can't keep our people physically fit and medically fit to do the job that they're meant to do. So absolutely a force multiplier and a delivery of capability right across the Defence Forces through policy that's been implemented is going to have a detrimental effect.
Okay, I'm conscious now of the time at this stage. I know you want to deal with some of Senator Riley's questions. I'm very keen to bring in members who haven't been in, but I do have an indication from Deputy Brady that he has a very brief and direct supplementary. I'll give him 30 seconds on that and then proceed back to Deputy Berry and Deputy Clark. Deputy Brady, if you're here, just for a direct question from the earlier round that you omitted.
Yeah, no, Chair, I actually asked it. I think the guys just forgot to pick up on it. It was just a failure to replace the civilian tradespeople and the impact that's having. Can we get some numbers and what the situation is like just in terms of the failure to replace those critical civilian tradespeople? Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Cameron King on that and in response to Senator Riley, and then back to Deputy Berry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deputy. And this also was asked by Senator Riley, and I will pick up on Senator Riley's questions after this. I had the privilege to work in the Defence Forces Training Centre for a number of years in my career, and nowhere else in the Defence Forces is the lack of civilian tradespeople so obvious than the FTC in relation to the dilapidated structures, the lack of maintenance, and when you dig a bit deeper and you look at the establishment of civilian tradespeople, it was up around, and I could be wrong, but I can check, but it was up around 300 when I checked, and it was, and what we had was about 40. And if we drill down into that, we were supposed to have 8 electricians, for example, civilian tradespeople, and we had 1. We were supposed to have 8 plumbers, we had none. That's the simple fact. And what was happening was, as these ladies and gents were getting on years and retiring, there were not people being recruited to replace them. It's just a simple fact. Now, I do believe in the white paper there was a project initiated and closed to bring in civilian tradespeople. I'm not sure how many, though, have actually been brought in since. But the impact on not replacing civilian tradespeople as time went on was very evident in a lot of locations around the country. The other questions from Senator O'Reilly in relation to pay and allowances or paying conditions. Is it pay or is it lifestyle? It's pay at certain points, Senator, and it's pay for the level of responsibility and the amount of time and amount of hours that people are working. And we talk about push factors and pull factors, and we talk about pull factors in a buoyant economy, and that's often being kind of thrown about. But we've seen and we've heard from our members and our retiring members about the push factors. And some of them who are, reasonably well paid, but they weren't well paid for the actual conditions of service that they were experiencing. And that's the problem. There has to be a sweet spot between pay and conditions in order to retain people. Where do the members go? They're going more and more, would you believe, to the public sector. I can count about 10 captains recently who have gone over the last year to assistant principal roles in the civil service. Okay, so it's not just big wages in Google or Aldi or Ernst & Young, etc., etc. It's the exchequer who is paying for these people, but just in different roles with better security of tenure, crucially, longer retirement ages, because all post-13s in the public sector now can serve to 70. We still have to be kicked out before 60. And there are the differences. You asked about the Working Time Directive and why has it not been implemented yet? I suppose it's not as simple, you would say, as clicking your fingers, but perhaps it is. It's just a matter of taking the exemption of the Garda Síochána and the Defence Forces out of the Organisation of Working Time Act. However, there's a question to be answered then, because in order to meet the limits, not targets, limits of working time in the Working Time Directive, you will need either more people or less roads. It's as simple as that. And the fact that the European Court of Justice 11 years ago found that Ireland was in breach of the Working Time Directive, and in 11 years it has still not been implemented, is a damning indictment of the value placed on our members and all Defence Forces personnel.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I now, if Deputy O'Reilly is, if Senator O'Reilly is happy enough with those responses, I'll now proceed back to the committee, starting with Deputy Cathal Berry and proceeding to Deputy Circuit Clerk. Deputy Berry, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to Racco. And just to thank Cameron King and his team for his very candid testimony this afternoon. It's very tough to listen to, actually. Very sad that an organisation who gives so much to the state is getting so little in return. Look, I just have 2 very brief questions because I'm very conscious that the Deputy Clerk wants to come in as well. The first one is, I'm sure Cameron King and his team can detect that this committee is on your side, basically, and we're very, very keen to assist. And this is an inter-party parliamentary oversight committee. Is there anything that we can do from a political point of view to assist? Like, for instance, we know the Commission on Defence will be reporting in December. Do you see a role for this committee in as part of that implementation piece? You mentioned that implementation is a big issue. We've lovely reports over the last 5 years, but very little implementation. So what about if this committee would bring before it whatever implementation entity is created to provide some kind of forensic scrutiny and the implementation on the Commission of Defence. Would the RACO team think that would be a worthwhile endeavour? So perhaps every 6 months that this committee has a standing meeting with the implementation body for the Commission of Defence, basically. So that's the first question. The second question, I know Chair Flanagan has mentioned this in the past as well. You mentioned, Cameron King, in relation to the dilapidation in the Curragh camp, and obviously I see it myself when I drive through it. It is the most derelict town in Ireland. You also mentioned that there's only 0.3% of Ireland's GDP or less goes towards defence. So the defence budget is very, very limited. Now, obviously, the ideal scenario is if the defence budget is increased, but at least in the short term, what would your thoughts be on individual buildings being identified and that we mobilise other government departments? So, for instance, Building X in the Curragh camp, if that was given to the Office of, so the OPW basically could actually renovate that particular building, or the Department of Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science could look after a particular building, or the Department of Heritage, or the Department of Rural Affairs basically. Is that something that you see would be useful to basically mobilise further budgets beyond the defence budget basically to address the terrible dereliction that's currently ongoing in the Curragh camp? So they're my two questions, Chair, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Deputy Berry. Deputy Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our guests this morning for both your time and your expertise. We often hear the words crisis and emergency and these really drastic words being thrown out there, but if there's anything that needs to focus the mind of the public on the Defence Forces at the minute, I think it's your exit survey that was carried out. It's absolutely stark. And one of your contributors to that under your theme for the roles and impact, to my mind, actually hit the nail on the head and put it very, very well when they said the organisation went through a number of change processes without knowing what it wanted to be at the end. And I think that is key when we come to look back at the 2012 reorganisation that took place and the disastrous impact that that has had since. We do also need to read, and it is on the same page, and it caught my eye. While I've been frank and honest in my responses, I'd like to highlight that I'm very proud to have served in the Defence Forces. And that's something that we need to be mindful also of, is that we have people leaving the Defence Forces, not so much by choice, but by a series of events that are forcing them into taking that decision. Some within their control, but the majority of them are outside of their control. And we need to look, and we need to look at, in one specific manner at this when it comes to pay and retention, in my opinion. The loyalty that the members of the Defence Forces give, that has to be respected. And it has to be respected through ensuring that there's recognition of the roles that they undertake, but also that there's appropriate enumeration for them. They do roles that nobody else outside of the Defence Forces do, and that's what makes them unique. And you spoke of uniqueness before, and I think this is something that we need to be honing in on, is that it is appropriate remuneration for the roles that they do. I also notice in the paperwork that was here that the Chief of Defence should be made accounting officer for significant operational share. Couldn't agree with you more. I think that's absolutely key, and it's something that government could do very quickly and very swiftly. And I think the impact that a decision like that would have, particularly around operations and capital expenditure and infrastructure, the impact of that would be felt in the short term as opposed to the long term also. Now, we've touched already on the working time direction. I do have a very specific question. You spoke about engagement with the Minister and with the department. How often have you met with the Minister for Defence? How often do you engage with the Department of Defence? And just to move on to the high-level plan, who, in RACO's opinion, is responsible for the failure of that plan to actually deliver? So we know 24% of personnel have less than 5 years' experience, 35% of commissioned officers. We know that's not sustainable. We know that's not best practice. It opens the door to huge health and safety concerns. And it also creates layers of gaps of experience in the Defence Forces. And when you mention the managed decline and being set up to fail, an ex-officer actually put it to me quite recently that in his opinion what he is seeing is a planned obsolescence of the Defence Forces. That what we are seeing now is not being done by error or by misjudgment, but is being done deliberately. And I'd like your opinion on that. And just to touch on, and you do specifically mention this to Primary Radar, I had brought this up with the Minister last year, and I find it beyond concerning that the 2015 white paper recognises that radar surveillance has been a priority, but neither the National Development Plan, there's never been any money put aside for this. In your opinion, what is the potential impact of not putting money aside on an urgent basis to put that piece of equipment into place? And finally, you mentioned the arbitration scheme, the conciliation and arbitration scheme. Is that working for your members? And if it isn't, what would you like to see changed about it? What are the fundamental improvements that you could see being put in place that would make this scheme actually more effective? And sorry, Chair, I wasn't quite honest there. I do have one more. When we come through this point in time, and this point in time for the Defence Forces, this crisis that we're in at the moment is over, and the Defence Forces are to emerge stronger, and they are to emerge fit for purpose. What is RACO's priorities? You mentioned your modelling, and there does need to be a balance struck between the recruitment crisis and the retention crisis that's there. But where would you like to see government actually focus on? What do you see as being the key areas of concern?
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Cameron King, I'm very conscious of the time in terms of replies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Berry and Deputy Clark. So Deputy Berry spoke about oversight and the potential for the committee to be an inter-party oversight committee with a role for implementation on the Commission. Yeah, it is absolutely fundamental that there's oversight in these plans, and proof of the pudding is in the eating of the high-level implementation plan. You know, there's a full page dedicated to oversight. It talks about the strategic HR group, and it talks about all updates on the implementation of the plan will be channeled through the Cabinet Committee F Senior Officials Group, which is chaired by a senior official in the Department of the Taoiseach. And as part of their role, the chair of the Senior Officials Group will liaise closely with the nominated coordinators in the Defence Forces, Department of Defence and Public Expenditure Reform on the individual actions contained in the plan and monitor implementation timelines. Monitor implementation timelines. 2 years into a one-year plan. We can't really say any more, only that there has obviously been a lack of oversight, or the eye is off the ball somewhere. If it's in the Defence Forces, if it's in the DOD, if it's in the DPER, or if it's in higher levels of government or more centralised government. Because this plan, which was to save the Defence Forces and to strengthen the Defence Forces and to make the Defence Forces an employer of choice, which it says it nearly on every page, has not been faithfully adhered to. And, you know, the strength figures which it continues to decline is proof of that. I think we had 82 discharges in the month of May, and we're seeing an upward trend in discharges this year, which is extremely worrying for our members. You spoke about, and obviously that would go for the Commission and the Defence Forces as well, because, you know, fool me once, shame on me, or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. You know, like, our members signed up to the high-level implementation plan in good faith. We believed we were going to be treated fairly in pay talks, and we went in with a heart and a half. And now we're absolutely participating in the Commission on the Defence Forces. But no matter what recommendations come out of the Commission on the Defence Forces, and we hope that they will be strong, if they're not adequately overseen, then it's a wasted exercise. And then you spoke about your constituency and the Curragh camp, which is in it, and whether we would see the benefit of individual buildings identified and renovated using other departments. Absolutely. You know, I believe, you know, there's potential for the likes of the military college, for example, to be seen as a university campus. It's accredited to university campuses. And why not? Like, there's a new department for further and higher education. Why could that not be leveraged? You know, there's so many public buildings which could be amenities in the Curragh camp that the OPW could be looking at, or the Department of Housing. There are houses there that are just boarded up. Why? Because people don't want to let them out to Defence Forces personnel. And I know that there was a problem with overholders, etc., but that's due to lack of oversight, and that can be easily fixed if the department or the Defence Forces is adequately resourced and helped to oversee, or if it's taken away and the military accommodation is overseen by some other department. But to leave it just derelict is not good enough. I think there were the two questions. And Deputy Clerk, you spoke about the exit survey and change processes. Yeah, it's very important to know what you want to be as an organisation. And you spoke about the 2012 reorganisation. And I think even the most, disinterested person would know that the 2012 reorg was done on budgetary lines, not on strategic lines. And the Commission on the Defence Forces is an example of where we need to ask ourselves, what are we about and what does the state want us to do? Do you know? What does the state want the Defence Forces to do? When I speak about black swan events and I speak about robust national insurance policy, I might just bring in Derek just to talk about the work of the Defence Forces during the pandemic, just for a minute, and I'll come back to your other questions afterwards, because it's very important that we recognise and acknowledge what's been done here.
I'm conscious of the time, so we'll hear a brief contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to March 2020, I think very high-level contacts were made between military management and the HSE. And in fairness to our Defence Forces and even the Department of Defence, there was a huge willingness to get involved straight away. And initially, that was around what they termed the 4 T's, the testing, the tracing, the transport and tentage. And later on, vaccinations was added to that. But when you start breaking down the figures of man days and the involvement, a year and a bit later, like 82,582 man days, to date. There's been 15,653 transport movements, 197 days of naval vessels been involved, 36 flights from the Air Corps moving vaccinations around the place, and even 1,722 man days from the RDF. So the contribution and the willingness and the agile nature of the Defence Forces to get involved in national resilience and deployment was very much there. We continue, as you know, to be involved in the mandatory quarantining and the vaccinations and the testing on that. The contact tracing, something that had never existed in the history of the state, was generated over a number of weeks, and led, managed and run by the Defence Forces. And we used cadets as the operators to such an extent that these people were so well switched on and well trained and well managed that they became the trainers of the trainers and, led the charge for the HSE to bring on that contact tracing. Now, while we all know there was issues, I think, it's a remarkable statement to say that our cadets, were so agile, so flexible that we're able to lead on that. So what we have done and what we've managed to do over the last kind of year and a half has been phenomenal. But we mustn't forget that came from existing resources. Not one extra person was recruited on the back of that. Not one extra bit of money came into the Defence Forces budget to do that. We continue to do all our other outputs, whether it's overseas or national security, patrolling the seas, patrolling the air. So, it's been a phenomenal effort, and we really, really want to stress, this is what we all joined up to do. This is what people want to do. What we would be concerned about when we pull back from the support of the HSE and the national resilience bit, what are we left with? Our Chief of Staff briefed us before Paddy's weekend last year, and he said, we have to be still standing. We have to still exist when all of this is over. And I would have concerns from a HR personnel side of things that when this effort is concluded, what will we be left looking like?
Okay, and Cameron King to deal with the remainder of Deputy Clerk's queries. Thank you.
There was a couple of questions to deal with there, Deputy. You asked about the accounting officer, Chief of Staff. Yeah, look, that is probably a policy matter, but certainly our members tell us that they feel that the Defence Forces would benefit from a greater say in the allocation and the deployability of resources. And, where certain delays have occurred potentially with deployments, this is seen as being, an extra layer of bureaucracy perhaps that shouldn't exist. How often have we met with the Minister for Defence? The Minister is only in since July 2020, and we met on 3 occasions in 2020, but we have not met in 2021. And our last meeting with the Minister was not very satisfactory from our perspective, simply for the fact that we were talking about the pay negotiations. at the time. And there were no answers, and there has been no follow-up since as to how we were treated and how this can be avoided in the future. And at that meeting, we tried to discuss the high-level implementation plan, which was supposed to be delivered in pay talks. We were asked to take it offline, and 7 months later, there's no follow-up. So that's very disappointing. It's just really disappointing for our members. In relation to, I'm not going to play blame game for the failure. I think there's a number of entities involved in the lack of delivery of the high-level plan. But it must be remembered, it still exists and it could be delivered, but there needs to be oversight. And this is where perhaps the Oireachtas committee could come in. And finally, planned obsolescence. I can't believe that. If we believe that, the three of us wouldn't be here. We couldn't believe that. I probably outside of my lane to talk about primary radar, but there's been plenty spoken about it, and I think that the threats are in the public domain. But probably from a representative point of view, it's probably in the operational space. And what improvements would we like to see in the CNA scheme? And we spoke about the tendency to go to arbitration straight away, and that in itself encapsulates the dysfunctional nature of engagement. It shouldn't always be adversarial. It shouldn't always be polarised. It shouldn't always be win-lose, you know. So what we'd like to see is we have a new independent chair and who's supposed to play an interventionist role. But he probably needs to knock our heads together and start to come up with solutions, because so far there's been just very little engagement. And if that was to happen and we were to maybe use conciliation, facilitation, mediation, rather than adjudication or arbitration, you know, it might be a bit better for our own members, and we would have more confidence in the scheme as a legitimate forum to conduct our business. But I think they're all the questions.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm going to move towards a conclusion, but as I do, I can't but remark on the very pessimistic nature and the very bleak picture that has been painted to us as a joint committee this afternoon. And this is a matter of some concern to us as committee members. And I want to echo what Deputy Berry has said insofar as our role and function and our engagement with the Department of Defence. And of course, this is a very timely meeting because it takes place against the background of the very crucial engagement with the Commission and the Defence Forces. And we did have the opportunity some weeks ago of engaging directly with the Chair. And I think the point that Deputy Berry has made as far as implementation is concerned is an important one, and one that we will look at in the context of our engagement and our relationship with the Department. Of course, I agree that the recommendations of the Commission must not only be resourced, but that there needs to be a level of oversight. And I think the suggestion made by Deputy Berry is one that we should certainly look at, and one that you might have a look at as well. I'm very conscious, for example, of the major report in my time as Minister for Justice, which was the Commission on the Future of Policing, in excess of 150 recommendations. But built into the final report was a mechanism for oversight which involved regular and mandated meetings with the Department of the Taoiseach, as well as the Department of Justice and the Garda Síochána. But we will have a look at the manner in which we best might assist. And again, I'm conscious of what Deputy Berry has said, that our role is in many ways separate of the executive and separate of government. And yes, we are keen to ensure that the picture being painted to us and for us by the representative bodies are positive and meaningful and optimistic. And I don't think any of those words are appropriate to today's proceedings. And I very much regret that as chair of this committee. I'm very conscious of the time. I'm conscious of the fact that both Deputy Brady and Senator Crockwell have indicated by raising their hand that they have a very brief supplementary, and I will ask that that be brief because we're very much running out of time. 1 minute each, starting with Senator Crockwell and Deputy Brady, and then a closing remark from Cumann King. Thank you. And Deputy Berry as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't delay too long. I just want to say that as a former serving member, it is absolutely heartbreaking for the second time to see a representative body before us here with such a bleak outlook. We have the RAF protecting our skies. We have EU ships protecting our seas. It's only a matter of time before we have Group 4 or some other security organisation minding our army barracks. I have to say, I have massive respect, but respect it needs to be tangible, and I don't see tangible respect. Indeed, there are very few of my colleagues here today that could be here. I constantly hear from your members and from members of PD Fora severe criticism of senior military management. I don't expect you to answer that question, but I need to put it on the record that senior military management need to step up to the plate because they feel that while all of your efforts are working hard on their behalf and PD Fora's efforts, they feel somehow let down at the very top. And I do think that something has to be done. The HR system has to change. I want to compliment you and your members. Officers joined the Defence Forces and took the President's Commission to serve this country with honour. We have debased that commission, so we have, just as we have debased the serving soldiers who serve loyally this state. I want to thank you for your time and for your efforts on behalf of your members. Thank you, Chairman.
I'll take Deputy Brady and then Deputy Berry. Deputy Brady, please.
Yep. And thanks, Chair.
And very briefly, because we
just to agree with some of the commentary there from Deputy Berry in relation to the oversight, which is, of course, critical and something I fully support in terms of a proposal. And I think the failure to have that oversight has really impacted on the implementation, particularly the high-level implementation plan. And I'm very concerned when you mentioned that the Programme Management Office has been disbanded. A body that is there to provide that oversight, in my view, and that was disbanded. Maybe could I get a little bit more information in relation to when that was disbanded and what rationale was given, if any rationale was given for its disbandment? And just the second question, just in relation to the Working Time Directive. In response to a query, you said that the last meeting took place, I think it was the 24th of July 2019, in relation to that, and obviously that failure has led to legal action being taken. Could I just ask in terms of, obviously there would have been requests for meetings, maybe you might just elaborate on that, how regular those requests went in terms of meeting to follow up in relation to the Working Time Directive, and again as to whether there was any rationale for not engaging to advance or continue some of the discussions that had been ongoing up to that point. Thanks, Chair.
And finally, Deputy Cathal Berry.
Thank you again, Chair. Just a question for Lieutenant Colonel Priestley, perhaps, and thank Lieutenant Colonel Priestley for outlining all the great work that the Defence Forces have been doing as a result of the COVID emergency. I'm just mindful that it sounds like a lot of very expensive operations have been taking place there, even paying the additional staff all for the additional hours and all the additional equipment that has gone on. I'm just mindful that the Department of Justice received many additional millions to assist them in providing the state's response from their perspective. Similarly, the Department of Education received many additional millions in a supplementary estimate, and even the Department of Health received many additional billions in a supplementary estimate. So I guess my question to the RACO delegation is, to the best of their knowledge, has the Department of Defence requested an additional supplementary estimate for the defence budget in light of the great work and the expensive work that the Defence Force have been doing over the last 15 months? And to the very best of their knowledge, has the Department of Defence ever applied for a supplementary estimate to, defray some of the costs associated with COVID or any other emergency over the last number of decades? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Cumann King, to deal with the questions briefly and maybe a final message for us as members of this committee. And thank you for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the deputies and senators for their really brilliant contributions. And let me just say at the outset, in case I forget to say it, it's not our nature and it's not our intent to be pessimistic about the Defence Forces. And what we have to say is, when we conduct stuff like the exit survey, we do so with a constructive mindset, and we do so in order to provide constructive solutions, which we have provided clearly in the exit survey, and they are simple solutions if the will exists. Exactly the same with the strengthening our Defence Forces, high-level implementation plan. There is a roadmap there. We did our part. We signed up to it. We have also made about 15 fully costed submissions on a range of retention issues that have been accepted with no feedback whatsoever. So we are trying to be constructive here. What I'd like to talk about, you asked about the Programme Management Office. I suppose I could correct myself somewhat in relation to disbanded. It just hasn't been staffed. Okay. I think COVID came at a time and the Joint Task Force was set up, etc. There was a bit of flux, but it hasn't been staffed. And therefore, the projects perhaps have not been progressing. In relation to the Working Time Directive, the question was about legal action. Was it?
The number of meetings I held.
Oh, sorry. So we spoke briefly about the Working Time Directive and how much of a fundamental issue it is for all of our members. And the key point really is that if we don't record our time, how do we know how many hours we're working? We have to actually self-record. So we have done many studies with our members, and we have done them over a 4 and 6 month period. And some of the hours that people are working are mind-boggling, you know. We talk about 60, 70, 80 hours in some cases. And when you look at the Naval Service and the amount of time they spend away from their families, it is nowhere near, and it cannot be, for seagoing personnel in compliance. So we have tried to get engagement on the Working Time Directive. The Garda Síochána were successfully able to engage between their management and their representative associations. And what they have in place now is something called the Western Town Working Time Agreement. And they actually are in compliance with the Working Time Directive. And it has not resulted in a loss of operational capability. But we haven't even been engaged yet. And the last question was to do with
in relation to supplementary budgets.
In relation to the supplementary budgets, I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that it is a mechanism that is there to be used. And I do know from a cursory glimpse at, again, the Garda Síochána supplementary estimate, that overtime is something that is paid out of a supplementary estimate. But we can't even begin to think about claiming overtime until we know actually how many hours we're recording. And that's why the fact that we can't actually record our hours 11 years after the European Court of Justice has found the state to be in breach as regards the Defence Forces, it's just not acceptable anymore. And that's why we've had to resort to legal action. And if you don't mind, I won't really comment on the ins and outs of the legal proceedings, just in case I do something silly. Just to sum up, Chair, I've said that, we don't want to be pessimistic and we're all about solutions. There are solutions here for the Defence Forces. We can easily provide for a post-2013 supplementary pension provision or some mechanism to bridge the gap between forced early retirement and access to state pension. If you can do it for a 65 to a 66-year-old, why can't you do it for a 60-year-old to a 66-year-old? Why treat the Defence Forces differently? If public servants can work to 70 and you're not going to allow Defence Forces members work to 70, you must compensate. And that is what the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said to us in a meeting. He said, we impose the restrictions on you, we have to compensate you. We were advised by the Department of Defence to make a submission to the Commission on Pensions. That's supposed to report tomorrow, I believe. And we are also aware that military management made a very comprehensive submission on the reinstatement of the supplementary pension provision for our members. And we really, really hope that these submissions are taken at face value and that some movement is made, because certainty is something that's lacking in the Defence Force at the moment in relation to posting, but in relation to future. And it's not only for officers. You've heard about the post-94s and the contracts issue. And if people are waiting until they come to the precipice, they're going to move. They're going to move before it comes.
I have to bring the curtain down, I think.
I'm pretty much there, Chair. So I'd just like again thank all the committee members and yourself, Chair, and your Secretariat for the honour of appearing before you today. Thank you very much.
And thank you. So can I thank Camann Conor King, the General Secretary, along with Lieutenant Colonel Derek Priestley and Commandant Luke Foley for your engagement with us. I also thank members. You have given us some work to do, and we will undertake to do that. And we await, of course, the end of the year and the report on the Commission on the future of the Defence Forces. And with that, I bring this part of the meeting to a conclusion.